Hello and welcome to another episode of the Carousel Podcast. I have with us today the Distributist, who is, most of you will already know him, but really he's a founding member, I would say, of our scene, an OG. The Prudentialist mentioned you as sort of his idol. And then I started digging a little deeper. I started hearing your name here and there, and I was like, oh man, this guy's like really legit. And really, like, you're like a godfather almost of our scene. You do really long but incredibly somehow engaging YouTube video essays, I believe they're called.
Yeah, I did. I got my start doing that, but the essay form has kind of been dropping off recently in popularity. I'm still going to do them, but
So is your
it's just
2022, like lessons from 2022, would you call that an essay?
no. That's a live stream. Essays are some things that I write out ahead of time, or that I work off notes and then edit them.
Okay.
I've been known for really long ones, but that was really more of a form that was popular in 2016. I think that's when I got my start. It just shows you. I mean, that's not that long ago, but you stick around for 7 years, and all of a sudden you're a godfather, right? So,
Well, but it's not
you know,
just your age. It's also the way you seem to be very close to the source, is what I will say. I don't know if your closest analog to me is Curtis. Like, I think that's who you see
yeah,
similar to me.
I would call Curtis part of the first generation. I'm sort of the post Gamergate people, even though I wasn't involved in the whole Gamergate thing at all. But my interaction was kind of trying to discuss right wing ideas with the disillusioned liberals that came out of the Gamergate era in 2014 to 2016.
So
And from there, sort of, there was this renaissance in NRX type thinking. So that's really what we embody these days.
were you a gamer?
No, I don't. I haven't played games since like 2013. The
Okay.
last, game I played was BioShock Infinite, which convinced me that, things were kind of going downhill, even though the game had a lot of great elements in it. And no, I was mostly just interested in it because I was it's kind of reacting to the 2012 election, which was the first and probably the last time I'd ever voted for a Republican. And I was just watching the culture kind of go increasingly insane. And I was curious if there would ever be a backlash to it. And indeed, there were backlashes, but they all were sort of defeated and crested. And the most notable one was obviously Trump in 2016, and the other populist backlashes that occurred during that year, which all at this point have more or less crested.
I'm looking at the 2012 election. That was
Romney versus Obama, part two.
Romney. That was Obama too. Okay, so you voted
Yeah.
Romney in that election.
I had voted, I'm an old person, so I had voted Democrat straight ticket until that election. And that's the first election that I was really approaching politics as sort of an Orthodox Catholic. And I kind of realized that, well, I had realized that Obama was essentially a driver of the culture war. And I thought that, this culture war, which I had thought even until that time was largely being driven by decisions made on the right, I began to realize in 2012 that the culture war was currently and always had been a project of the left. And they were sort of cynically using this to kind of drive politics in a radical direction and kind of remake the cultural landscape. And this is something that I thought kind of foolishly in 2012 could be resisted by some kind of popular pushback. But, as we've seen again and again, it can't be.
Why can't you? What can't be? You mean the progressive culture war fighting, or are you saying, yeah?
Yeah. So what I'm saying is like sort of progressive, the progressive slow takeover of the institutions.
Yeah. Okay.
And we now call wokeness, but has had many names over the course of American history.
We once
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it embodies a variety of policies that are at any given time incredibly unpopular, but continuously gain steam.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a classic one would be mass migration, which was never popular. The policy of mass migration that started with the Hart-Celler Act or the 1965 Immigration Act was misrepresented when it came into being, and the product of it, which was sort of a large increase in immigration to the United States, and also sort of an increase in the locations or the origins of immigration. That policy has never been popular, and it continuously just gets, but it's untouchable.
Yeah.
The same thing with affirmative action, the same thing with sort of what I call the strong elements of the civil rights revolution that were never really presented to us in school, but are nonetheless a core part of the civil rights revolution, and in many ways the more relevant part. You encounter them in your local HR department, but these are very much a part of law. The same thing when it comes to any number of the sort of developments in sexual culture. These things were not popular. They had negative results that are quite demonstrable, and yet they're untouchable. They're fixtures of a society that they're not up for debate in any meaningful way. And to the extent that they're pushed back on by people like Mitt Romney or Donald Trump, and they're both kind of futile, but in very different ways, the system just kind of shrugs them off. There's this really radical immune response that occurs across all different elements of the government, both formal and informal, to quash these kind of popular rebellions against the direction that our elites, our intellectual elites want us to go in.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is because America, this is sort of stealing this from, I mean, Sam Francis or Yarvin. It's a lot of different people came up with this idea, but this is because our reigning oligarchs, our ruling class, our Brahmin caste have a certain religion.
Yeah, and it's progressive.
And yeah, it's progressive. And this religion likes going left. And not only does the religion, based on historical properties that are unique to it, like going left and see itself as a left-going force, sort of the nature of the left wing's constant problematizing of different social elements, it's deconstruction
dragon slaying, right? It's dragon slaying. It needs dragons to constantly slay. That comes from Moldbug. I mean, that's
and it manufactures them, and it destroys social institutions that work and that are stable,
and then the hero, they get
and then
idolize them. And civil rights,
you get to create jobs. Specifically, you get to create managerial jobs,
right.
Either in the government proper or in sort of subsidiary institutions. And the number of these things is sort of legion. A good example might be the college institution of college itself as sort of something that everyone went to. I mean, people are going to college now and they know more than your average high school student coming out of school in the 50s.
Yeah.
And certainly they write worse. And then they come out with, $30,000 of debt that needs to be managed as well, right? And so these are kind of they create problems, and then they create the solution to those problems, and this creates a sort of left-going force, a force of entropy that's slowly devouring our social order. And this is something that obviously Curtis Yarvin has detailed better than I ever have. So
no. I just think we're diving right in. So you've described in the past, I was listening again to I would highly recommend for people who are just tuning in, we're jumping right in here, but I would recommend your end of 2022 things from 2022 stream. It is so good. And it's 4 hours long. But I just went on like a 2-hour hike today because I had to prepare for this anyway, and I just was listening to it. First of all, how do you go back on YouTube? You can't. You have to press your thumb on it. I never really use YouTube. I'm totally positive.
Oh yeah.
It's so annoying. You have to move your thumb around.
YouTube is basically legacy technology at this stage, but it was first off the line, so it's what everyone uses, right?
So anyway, I was slip and sliding around your thing because I kept wanting to go back and hear what you were saying. But at one point you said, and I couldn't go back, so I had to listen to it. But you kept saying this thing about the waveform of the populist rebellions. You're we crest like waves. It builds up and builds up, it crests, and then it slams against this force that you're talking about, which is this undefeatable progressive march that seems to never end. Or, I'd be curious to hear when you think that started, because it's unclear to me. I mean, I think most people would probably say it starts in the progressive march starts when that's FDR, right? Like pretty much.
That's when it takes over the
Yeah.
United States government.
Right.
I mean, well, I mean, that's where our current iteration of these things. The thing is that the United States government didn't really exist in the same way
Yeah.
it did. And if you take Curtis Yarvin's model, what we call the cathedral is a splinter branch of Protestantism that comes out of New England and these places like Harvard University. And it kind of evolves, and it evolves with the nature of the federal government from sort of a personal translational religion early 19th century to sort of a an internationalist but still recognizably Christian missionary religion, Republican missionary religion in the late 19th century, very in tune with the post Civil War style government we had, to then it being sort of a more or less secular atheist kind of pseudo-Christian religion with all its kind of proper elements discarded in the form of things like the US State Department and the various different NGOs the US State Department birthed after World War II to sort of denazify Europe and then to kind of I mean, let's not mince words here, rule Europe in almost every meaningful way.
Right.
And then and that really is what set the tone for things like the civil rights revolution, which was very much a product of this class. And you can read
you're
things.
Putting it all at. You're saying it's all the WASPs. You're saying it's all the kind of lefty WASPs.
Well, I mean, the thing is that, I don't know what was the Greek, was it Heraclitus who said this? I forget. But he says you can never step in the same river twice, right? So, or like this ship of Theseus, like this ship that started sailing from the landing of the Mayflower
right, though,
has stopped in many places, and many different peoples have kind of amended parts to it. And if you talk to people on the very far right, I'm sure they will notice a certain non-Christian religion who made very critical contributions to this ship in the early 20th century. But I think that the most relevant elements are still they still have to do with this idea of sort of secularized Christian universalism that emerges from New England in sort of post-Revolutionary War.
Well,
I think the other ones are not. I mean, I don't know. You could argue over you kind of catch mimetic diseases and certain pathologies get magnified, right? So if you have a reason to really hate Christianity, and that gene enters the gene pool in the early 20th century, then it could mutate, it could get magnified through this sort of a subconscious process, a subconscious institutional process that keeps on going until you are where we are now. So there you go.
Well, you're definitely right that. So when you really look behind the curtain, like, it's funny. Are you familiar with the show Yellowstone?
Everyone talks about it. I'm aware that it's sort of about these Westerners.
Yellowstone does the same thing that quite a bit of our like current propaganda as art that you're talking about. Like also the show, the movie Glass Onion also does this. Yellowstone provides a imaginary world in which the elites in a given place are all the right-wing version of the thing you're talking about. So in the world of Yellowstone, all the ranchers in Montana that own all the giant ranches are actually like Republican, hardcore Republican guys. But classic kind of populist Republican cowboys. In actuality, I know who owns those ranches. Those ranches are all owned by exactly the people you're talking about. It's all
like coastal shit libs,
like the big name families that are now the ones behind these billion-dollar corporations. Like I'm not Kellogg, but like families like Kellogg, these names you've heard of. They own all those ranches.
Classic WASP person, classic WASP, exactly. Like internationalist,
super. So to like put it at the foot of the Jews, I agree. It's like you can't do that. And what you're saying is this thing goes way back further. But if it is a river you can't step in twice, we have the ability to name a fucking river. We know what a river is. But the thing that you're talking about is the Leviathan that if it's just a thing that exists, how can we not say it isn't God? Because if we have no way to, doesn't God want it? Like, or it's Satan.
Well, I mean, the problem is that as this thing has grown in power and prominence, it has sort of made bets about what the future was going to look like and what the human race could do and how human organization should play out.
Right.
And specifically over the course of really the last 60 years, it's made a number of bets that are just bad bets. These visions of the future of humanity just do not correspond to reality or to human thriving. My favorite one of these was the sexual revolution.
Yeah.
The sexual revolution just does not work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the feminists have been at this project of coming up with a plan of what sort of a healthy middle-class family life should look like for the average person. And their two solutions are, we like to be rich and then have polygamy among a bunch of people who are billionaires. Or, we're going to tell sort of noble savage tales about the broken families of sort of the third world subpopulations that exist in the first world, or just the third world populations. These sort of ghetto broken families aren't even a good representation of the native cultures that they come from. They are very much families that are broken by modernity. But because they're so distant, you can tell sort of just so stories where all of these, horrible situations that lead to a lot of human misery are actually sort of preternaturally progressive dreams of a post-masculine future. Really, what they are is just disasters.
Wait, but I understand the part that you're saying of the elites wanting to have a poly whatever thing, but you're saying they're creating this noble savage myth of the broken families of the underclasses, but I'm not seeing a lot of that. Like, I don't turn on the TV and see like, oh, the black father, 75% of black children.
You don't see anything about like the black matriarch who's the perfect feminist icon, or
I can see that, but aren't you saying that they're saying that it's a tragedy? Aren't they trying to? Oh, you're saying they're noble.
It's
the brokenness. I get it.
They're saying that the brokenness is externally applied to it from the macrocosmic culture, and that is true in a sense.
Yeah.
But part of the way that the tragedy is applied to is that there was a traditional form in these societies that worked, that was, if not patriarchal, more patriarchal than it is now. That form was destroyed by either just sort of the implicit effects of modernization, or explicit attempts by the mainstream establishment to break these things. And then what has emerged in the interim are these kind of incredibly degraded human societies that you see in places, these very depressing places, and these are not examples of human thriving. And these places were thriving. I mean, again, thriving is obviously relative. They still were very poor, but they were better off like 100 years ago. And even with sort of the discrimination that existed, these places had more ordered existences. They didn't have penicillin necessarily, but they didn't have this family destruction where half the kids were being raised outside of a stable family life, which has huge impacts on children. And so this is an example of the cathedral, as reactionaries call it. It starts getting overconfident and starts betting against reality, until the point where they're literally asking you to just assert the opposite of what's plainly in front of your eyes. So The Atlantic, for instance, a few months ago ran an article where they were implying basically, and I think NPR ran one of these articles too. So these are sort of like The Atlantic and NPR. These are major mouthpieces. I mean, NPR is, it literally operates under a stipend from the federal government, under the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And so, but these are core mouthpieces of the philosophy that we associate with the State Department and the universities, and they literally tell their audience that like it's more than likely that men have no advantage against women in sports so long as they identify as women. Like they're telling people that with a straight face, and
they're saying,
so at this point,
fat is ugly. Fat is ugly is beautiful. Freedom is slavery. They're doing very classic 1984 things, but you're saying that this is one strain that results from the sexual revolution that is extremely perverse. That this is one path they went down that's really bad. That doesn't work.
Well, it doesn't work because it's not true. It's obviously not true.
Right.
Obviously we could, I think that there are a lot of things that aren't true about what we say about democracy, right? But our democracy, despite the fact that it doesn't work for the reason we say it does, like it is part of a system that does work.
Oh.
America between 1900 and, obviously some communities start working a lot less well in the 70s, but really up until the later 2000s, the stability of the American world was incredible. And so that system worked, despite the fact that it might be based on a lie about how humans behave. It was that lie didn't contradict just plain reality.
Yeah.
And now some of these sort of lies or these untruths they're telling, they just flatly contradict the reality we can see right in front of our eyes.
So let me just ground people for 1 second. What you're I'm following barely.
Okay. Oh, so I'll slow down. I'm apologize.
You're so fucking smart that it's like it's great. It's incredible. I mean, it's like you've already just like put me into such a world of red pilling. Most of what I do on this podcast is just complain about shit. Like, oh, look at the woke advertising. Whereas you're actually explaining what's happening, and I think it's really genius and really accurate. But I just want people to understand what you're saying. You're saying that there's this force of progressive liberalism. This is very Moldbugian, but you're putting it in a really accessible way.
I'm taking this from Moldbug, but you can find similar things in like Sam Francis or James Burnham. This comes from a lot of different people. Yeah. So yeah,
it's a running force of progressivism that has been running through society for a long time. It's seemingly unstoppable. It seems to come from originally maybe rooted in this Protestant lefty kind of thing that just was with the country from the beginning, but it's been mutated. The Jews hopped on after the diaspora. Now today we've gotten to this world where they keep winning, they keep doing it, but is what you're saying it's getting stale because some of the paths that they've gone down, particularly the sexual one for EG, are you saying we're reaching the end of this river because things are starting to ask us to say things that are obviously not true? Or have they always done that? Have they always done that? And it's just, this is the latest version.
Well, I mean, they're starting to, governments will always ask people to say things that are not like technically true. Like not technically true is not the same thing as saying you to assert something that isn't true. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, societies have religions, and is it true that George Washington never told a lie?
Yeah.
Is it true that Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves in the way that you hear? I mean, there's the Emancipation Proclamation that's his real document, right? But like, is it true in the way you learn about it in, high school history class? No, it's not. These things are kind of like exaggerations, not quite true, getting at something that's more sophisticated. But there's a difference between doing that and then just saying like, oh, well, this destroyed community is actually a great place to live because it's more diverse. Or the Sweden, which is experiencing sort of a crime epidemic, historically speaking, its government's never been better. Or crime has never been lower in New York City than it is right now after 2020. These things are just demonstrably false. We can see them, and moreover, they have a huge impact on our lives. Another thing that has a huge impact on our lives, like there's been a collapse of the dating market. This is something that we never talk about, but people just don't pair off anymore. There's been a slow decline of the marriage market. But sometime around when the younger millennials came of age, specifically in the era of social media, this decline of the marriage market corresponded in a steep sort of collapse of the dating and mating markets, to the point now where it's just utterly smashed. And it's questionable how anybody, like a significant percentage of my generation, the millennials, how any of them are going to pair off and have families before a large amount of them become functionally infertile. That's an open question now. And you can't sweep this under the rug. You can't sweep an entire generation just not having children under the rug and claim that this is one of the blessings of liberty or feminism or civil rights or whatever. these are things that are going to just capsize your society if they're allowed to persist. And you know, and as we've demonstrated, the woke sort of, what, I don't know, who did Elon Musk call it, the woke mind virus. This has permeated institutions that are training things like doctors, and it's permeated research. And so it kind of, it's not, it's hard to see where the sort of, in the 90s it was clear that this PC stuff, we called it PC back in the 90s, that it was sort of consigned to particular areas of the culture, like university campuses, and really only certain departments in university campuses. But now, thanks to the magic of strong civil rights, it's everywhere. And these sort of assertions, you know, they kind of cloak any number of untruths.
Yeah. So, but what I'm trying to get at, sorry, there's a helicopter going by. What I'm trying to get at here is, okay, so we're saying, I'm trying to like follow the line of this story. So we're talking about, for example, the dating market. I heard you on your podcast, you talked about the manosphere. You obviously, as a religious man, are not a manosphere.
I come into conflict with them a lot. We have the same kind of enemies. So I try not to draw knives. But you know, it's kind of like you know, the Americans in the Soviet Union in World War II. We're kind of looking across from each other, going like, well, you said this alliance.
You said this totally genius thing about them, which I think was, I have never heard anybody say this, and it was so true. And I've always wanted to say this to them, which is, I can't remember how you phrased it, but basically what you were saying was, once you start talking about the prostitute thing or the cheating thing in public, you've ruined the, you're fucking up. You are fucking yourself up. You're telling the truth, but you're fucking yourself up, and you're fucking the next generations up. You know, like you're sorry for swearing, by the way. I don't actually.
No. This is a classic. This is a great example of a lie that was
good. That was good.
I'm not good. None of these lies are good, right? Because you know, if you go back and if you go to France in, you know, the 8th century, you know, in the time of Charlemagne, right? I think that, you know, French men having mistresses, this wasn't a thing. Charlemagne had mistresses, very notably, but this was heavily frowned upon by the church, and they only cut the exception because he was literally, you know, he had them by the balls, to, you know, speak crudely, right? But by the 19th century, when France was secularized, like every well-to-do French gentleman had a mistress, to the point where there's literally like a musical, like you can watch a classic musical, Gigi, about French men having like these, like there's a whole class of women just designed to be rich men's mistresses. And you know, the reason why this kind of worked is that the ruling class of France agreed to be 100% behind monogamy in their proclamations, even as they subverted it behind closed doors, because they understood that if monogamy was sort of universally abandoned, the French society would fall apart, and you know, in the same way that polygamous societies always fall apart, because men can't get married if all the women get absorbed by the upper 10% of men, and you explode into war. And so, I mean, you know, this is what, you know, Plato might call a noble lie. But now, you know, what the pickup artists want to do, and what the feminists have done for the left, is they take sort of these seedy realities, and they want people to sort of proclaim them as a religious principle. And like, you know, I can't, you know, even if I'm forced, if you get me by the hand and you just like twist my arm as a Catholic and force me to accept the fact that King Charlemagne is just going to have a bunch of women on the side, and I can't object, because if I do, my monasteries will get burned to the ground by Vikings, because he's not going to defend them anymore, and like maybe accept that. But if it's just like, if you're proclaiming from the pulpit that, you know, all of a sudden everyone should just go into a sexual free-for-all, because it's whoever gets the most, and of course the guys with the most money will, you know, you don't have a society, you don't have a functional order anymore. And you know, this is essentially what we're doing, is we can't maintain the level of hypocrisy we're being accepted to embrace anymore, and the whole thing is kind of crumbling again.
Yeah, the way I put it is there are things men know that women can never know, and there are things rich men know that regular men can never know. And it's just, you just have to accept that. And that's always the way it's been. It's always the way it's going to be. And trying to like ferret your way into, Marx tried to do it too. Marx was like, well, you guys are doing it. Everybody should do it. You know, like he says that in the Communist Manifesto. He says, community of wives. You guys do it. We should have community of wives too, right?
Well, there's a society. I mean, there are, I'm kind of a believer in cyclical history, and at very sort of primordial stages of civilization, you can have instances where people are like just on average very, very moral.
Yeah.
Like the rate of adultery, like to take our own, stream, so to speak, our own puritanical origins. If you go back to Plymouth Rock, like the number of men who committed adultery would have been absolutely minimal.
Well, they were also like
relative,
but wasn't that was a so they weren't raiding? They were raiding and banging the Indians for sure.
I don't know. I mean, it's a good. I'm sure that like some obviously the admixture with Native Americans was certainly hot and heavy in the late 19th century. But in the early Plymouth Rock period, like the penalties for male adultery were, I think they might have been death, actually.
Yeah.
Now, this was not a society that turned a blind eye to it, because it was in this sort of primordial level of religious enthusiasm. And Christianity was not a young religion at that stage. It was 1,500 years old. But the civilization, so to speak, was. And they were experiencing sort of this new renaissance when everyone was sort of fervently in belief of this principle. And it was expected to adhere to it in every element of their lives. And by the time you get to where we are now, I mean, no one believes in this religion anymore. No one even believes in the secularized progressive version, if they're really honest about it. I would maintain.
Of what? Of which religion? Sorry, I mixed up.
Well, I mean, I guess I'm kind of mixing my metaphors a little bit, but Christianity has I am a believer in Christianity, but the number of elite believers in Christianity is very small in the present age. Furthermore, in Christianity's successor religion, wokeism, there are very few sincere, intelligent believers of wokeism, I would maintain too. Most of them are cynical actors, or sort of, I don't want to be sort of, I guess I can't be, but a lot of them are just sort of these hysterical women who they're gravitating towards some ideology, and this is the one closest to hand. So, because they're looking for something to sort of emote over, and George Floyd died this week, it's going to be the cult of George Floyd for the next 3 years. Yeah. And and that's how it works. But when it comes to sort of leaders, who are the people who really believe in this woke stuff sincerely? One of my favorite characters from the last year was, I mean, did you follow the Sam Bankman-Fried saga?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, you did.
So like, I saw the text.
Okay, so
I do this on purpose. Yeah.
I mean, he's very progressive, right? He is one of these people who comes from Palo Alto, California, which is like progressive apex society. He goes to school in MIT, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Like, again, the apex of sort of like cathedral Boston Brahmin culture, a very own waspy kind of puritanical institution. Again, that's been now thoroughly wokeified. And we have, because he was audited and because everyone seized his records, we now have conversations between him and colleagues going like, okay, like, we all know this woke stuff is bullshit, but we have to go through the motions and say it, so that we can get our capital to manage the world and rule the world.
And then he said he ends it with, it really sucks the people who get screwed over by it.
I know, yeah, of course. Like, but we're too rich to, right? It's all those middle class people, right? But we're sort of above the parapet with this one, and this is the attitude, and this is the religion is dead when all of your elites just don't believe in it anymore. They embrace it cynically, and it's really for sort of the upper middle class to sort of emote over and get caught up in these sort of moral crusades. We want to save Black lives by increasing the crime rate by 30% and killing off thousands of Black people. Like, that was the last moral crusade. I mean, I want to golf clap that one, guys. You did a great job saving Black lives with the cult of St. George Floyd. That worked out wonderfully. This is, no one believes this.
No, the fact I wanted to throw in before on that note is that the black marriage rate, I'm sure you know this,
Yeah.
wasn't it 75% in
It
1940 or something, and now it's 25%. Black, oh sorry, out of
yeah.
wedlock. Now only 25% of black children are born in wedlock. 50 years
Yeah.
ago, it was like 75%, is what I'm trying to say. So it's like,
Yeah, at the end of World War II, the black community was intact. Like you could,
yeah,
it was highly organized around religious institutions.
yeah, right.
And now the black community is basically a complete client of the university and leftist activist classes. It comes together when the Democratic Party needs it to come together. And then short of that, it disappears.
Yeah, no,
Because if I were Malcolm X and I wanted, I do want African Americans to be independent and healthy and religious and have good families and dignified jobs and have their own land and be masters of their own destiny. But if I were somebody who wanted this to happen, I would be running around trying to get somebody to stop this enormous crime rate that's consuming an enormous number of young black men's lives. And that's been going on for 2 years now. But nobody cares about that because it doesn't have a political benefit to the Democratic Party to talk about this or get it solved. Or, another one would be like, if I cared about I do care about the African American, but if I was a African American who was like, had skin in the game, I would want to reduce the black obesity rate, which is like, that must be like, African Americans are, people don't talk about this on the right. They are going to be demographically endangered because their birth rate's collapsing, just like everyone else's. And part of that is the fact that their population is so unhealthy.
yeah,
And and these would be the issues that we would tackle if we were interested in actually being a steward of this community, but we're not. What
yeah.
we are a steward of is a certain grievance politics that's useful for a certain type of elite people in universities. And and because of that, I mean, and good luck. But for right wingers, it doesn't behoove us to kind of push ourselves forward as like, oh well, we're going to fix things. We can't fix things. You can't really fix things for other people's communities. You can just not screw with them, right?
Well,
Or provide them with order, right? But
yeah.
I don't know. It doesn't really, the National Review's been trying to do this. The Democrats are the real racists for years now, and it never works because of
No,
this
it
reason,
never
right?
works for the exact reason that you said already, which is that this strain is the things that defeat this strain are never logic. The logic never defeats this thing that you're talking about. That you just in the beginning I said waveform. So in your podcast or your stream, you had said that the way that populism works is it's like a wave, and it can kind of hit on this progressive thing, but the problem is it's short, and then it loses interest. It drains out very quickly. It hits it, and then it drains away. It hits it, and it drains away. And so what they can do is assert constant, endless, pressure like a wall. And we're just kind of like slamming up against this thing, and we can't really sustain pressure, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's like a big problem. So,
Yeah.
like when I see this wave, like that's kind of what you're talking about. Like if the wall responded to logic or rationalism, which arguably they did in the Enlightenment, right? Arguably they did in the beginning. Now they don't.
Yeah, maybe. Right. But yeah, I mean, we had a much more kind of pliable ruling class back then, I guess you could say, right?
Well, because they were all writing each other long letters, they were all like
Yeah.
trying to get to the core of it. And that's probably, where this all started. But I guess my question is, if logic doesn't hurt this thing, and you're saying this waveform is a bad thing because we can't pressure them back the way that they can pressure us. What pressure can we assert on them? I mean, do we want to embrace our nature as a wave where we're like, we just want to get bigger and taller waves? So it's like Trump times 10. It's, CRT times 10 next time. It's, we have these certain things that win occasionally. I mean, we get.
The problem is the wave's getting weaker, right? So the wave is getting, this is. I mean, but the way is like, for instance, the amount of populist energy you had behind Reagan was 1,000. I mean, did you see how Reagan won in
he won every
1980? He run overwhelming, like, and even that was less than Nixon. You know, I think Tucker Carlson had a segment on just how popular Nixon was, and Nixon was sort of the iteration 1.0 of the anti-civil rights, basically, right, or anti-strong civil rights, right? Because I'm sure Nixon would be fine with things like Brown v. Board. He might have some caveats with the stuff like the Equal Opportunities Commission, although he did reluctantly ratify like affirmative action, right? But reluctantly, as my Nixon fans have constantly reminded me. But these characters, these populist surges, were enormous back in the day, and they've gotten successfully weaker. And the only way to do this, the only way that this is going to be overcome, is by increasing focus. Now,
focus.
The thing is,
focus.
Well, for instance, like CRT, the reason why Christopher Rufo is successful is that he's focusing. He still has the same problem that he's trying to use populist energy, which can't do a sustained push.
Yeah.
But at least he has the targets in the right direction. He understands that the problem is the universities, right? The problems aren't specific people, right? If this were the 1980s, we'd be complaining about, some specific person who said something ridiculous, like Angela Davis. She was a boogeyman in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
Or various different like front figure pieces. This is not the problem. The problem is the institution itself. The other thing that's going on here too is that if we're treating the oligarchy or the cathedral as a wall, the oligarchy is getting weaker, so the waves are getting weaker, and the wall is getting weaker, and the wall's not getting weaker because it is. You said, well, logic doesn't matter, right? Well, kind of. Logic does not matter in the sense that you can't walk up to somebody and argue them out of their beliefs. But if somebody has to wake up every day and convince himself that black is white, ugliness is beauty, men are just as strong as women are, and some men menstruate and have babies, and it's very important. Like, gender doesn't exist, but it's very important that we surgically amputate healthy organs so that this non-existent thing can be fixed. Like that, and any variety, and crime isn't up, and all of these other absurdities, right? Those sort of logical absurdities are going to slowly erode people's beliefs in this promise, to the point where the elite is just basically cynically ruling and using these ideological preconceptions as a pretense, and they'll have their howling little red guard, to borrow like a term from the Cultural Revolution, also, which a lot of were women back in the Chinese example. These red guards will exist, but the leadership and the intellectuals will be completely checked out because nobody will believe in it anymore. And that's when the barrier, the oligarchy barrier, starts weakening and weakening and weakening, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It's sort of to again mix my metaphor, it's sort of like a red giant expands, but it gets weaker as it expands. And the problem here is that the populist energy just can't do anything independently of itself. It's going to create a big hubbub. With the CRT stuff, like they'll illegalize CRT, then the teachers unions are going to call CRT something else, and then they're going to go do the same.
Not going to actually do anything.
Yeah. I mean, Rufo knows that he needs to get rid of like the university system, but Rufo can't get rid of the university system because he doesn't have the political energy to do that. The parents want the immediate problem of these sort of crazy teachers to go away. And the obvious compromise is for those teachers to pretend like they've gone away and then keep on doing what they're doing at a sort of like more quiet level, which is essentially what happened in the 90s with, the original pushback against PC then.
Yeah. Wait, what was
that's
what are red guards? And I'm actually very intrigued by that because I actually
so this is something. So well, people don't remember this, but so people are aware that this has happened in many different forms and under communism, but the most prominent one is China. So everyone knows that in like 1946, Mao took over China and made it communist. And in the 50s, he had he had these like 5-year plans that were total disasters and killed a bunch of people. But people don't forget after this, in sort of the early 60s, this is this bizarre element of Chinese history. Mao organized, or Chairman Mao and a bunch of hardcore communists inside the Communist Party of China. They organized a communist revolution inside a country that was already communist. This is called a Cultural Revolution. And so they organized these battalions of revolutionary students, an enormous number of whom who were women. And they would go and hunt down people who were insufficiently dedicated to the revolution and punish them, sometimes murdering them, for counter-revolutionary thoughts, and then shipping them off to the countryside to work as and oftentimes die as laborers. And there was recently a great science fiction book that starts in the Cultural Revolution that I've been reading recently called The Three-Body Problem. It's science fiction, but the stuff they say about the Cultural Revolution is real. It does remind you of this wokeness stuff. They call them struggle sessions.
Yeah,
you may have heard that. Yeah. And struggle, So the Red Guard would organize these things called struggle sessions, where they would be like mock trials, where they would put people on trial by mob justice for supposedly counter-revolutionary thoughts or actions or speech. And it was a revolution that was organized by the extant government to be more in keeping with the wills of the government. And it's bizarre when you think about it, right? Exactly how it worked, right? But this literally happened in China.
And it was women. It's like the same exact thing as now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Was it all women? No, but like, you always, when you see pictures of these cultural red guards, like half of them are like these women students who are dressed up in the Madame Mao outfit with the cap and everything, and like stringing up some shop owner, nailing like a hat to his head or something like that says like, I'm a bourgeois, counter-revolutionary bourgeoisie, right? All of these things. It's just I think you also see, if you watch the movie The Last Emperor, the last scene, it depicts the Cultural Revolution.
Nothing about Chinese. I know absolutely nothing about the Chinese Revolution at all. Like, that's a total blank spot in the map. So that's fascinating. I didn't realize there was the mini revolution inside the big revolution. So did that ever get any justice? Was there any, or is that they're still in power? Basically, it's the same.
Well, I mean, it burnt out, right? Yeah, and then people. I think the current crop of rulers, like Xi Jinping, were people who were just like, okay, we never want that to happen again. Let's just rule China like a non-ideological technocracy, right? So in many ways, you could see the current government as being kind of a response to it. But the response to the Cultural Revolution was just to have like basically a king. And obviously there's like, the whole Tiananmen Square thing, right? That they tamped down as well. Which was more of a revolution to try to become more like the United States. But it was just completely cracked down on, obviously. But China is an incredibly non-ideological state right now. It is incredibly technocratic. The pretense that there's some kind of Marxist state is, no one believes it. No one believes it. Absolutely, right? Now, the problem is I don't think that that's possible for our society. Our type of society just is not going to be able to do that.
So returning to our wave and our wall, you're saying that the wall is becoming a red dwarf, which is like, it's getting too gaseous and thinning out because it's getting bigger or whatever. I do find
the dimensions I'm talking about, it's increasing the number of people who are involved in it as believers, but the sort of like the believability of its propositions is watering down, right? So like the global American empire, right? Their ability to wield soft power has decreased among elites as their hard power and their reach has increased, right? And so because of that, the empire is becoming very, very brittle. Very, very brittle, and the edges are showing signs of kind of breaking away. And who knows how long this is going to last, right? But all we can say that is the nature of power in the West is changing rapidly.
Have there ever been, in any society ever, have there ever been this many women in the power structure as there are in America today?
Well, that's a good question. Probably not. I mean, this is the most feminized, other than like examples that are hard to trace in like ancient Greece, where people tell stories of these things, right? It's hard to kind of come up with another analogy. I've been told there were societies that were functionally ruled by eunuchs, and but I don't know. I feel like that's exaggeration a little bit, right? Maybe it's not, right? But this is certainly, we're testing like limits of how many women can actually operate inside positions of government and power.
Yeah, I mean, are you aware of this whole longhouse metaphor?
Yeah, I mean that's sort of. Well, the thing is that with BAP, it's always kind of hard to tell about how much is sort of allegorical and how much is sort of like hard history, because he again, it's always hard to tell whether he's talking historically or metaphorically.
Yeah.
And his vision of the longhouse, which I'm writing an essay kind of about females and power.
Yeah.
I finished writing it. I'm trying to get it out. Find time to record it, but he for your audience here, he spins a story about late stage civilization where there's no more wars to fight and women just take over the functioning of society, and the main goal of the longhouse is just kind of like make sure everyone's continuously kind of weak, too weak to resist
and watched, right? It's a panopticon.
And watched, yeah.
It's total monitoring of surveillance,
and everything is political. Everything is political, and not in the sense that like we're going to wield power for the greater good. But everything is political, and everything is sort of a contest of needs and wills.
Yes,
and that's ultimately governed by some kind of like class that determines who has the strongest needs.
Yeah,
it's an entirely voice-based system. And this is always like Richard Hanania, before he kind of fell back into the realm of shit library, had this great essay in 2021 that said female tiers win in the marketplace of ideas.
Yeah, I literally tweeted that exact thing today because you said it on your
well, I didn't invent it.
I know it was Hanania, who I don't even know who
Hanania. But
it's real though. I will tell you
that is the longhouse, right? That's the longhouse in one sentence, right?
So most men have never been through this, and I was lucky enough to go through this. I work professionally as a copywriter, creative director in advertising agencies, already very highly female, right? So you're already talking about 60, 70% female. But most marketing agencies still at the top are run by men, right? Or at least enough men are in there that it creates a kind of diverse thing. It still works the way that every institution you've ever worked in your life, it kind of has the same vibe. I worked at one agency that was a pharma agency that was like 85% women. All the leadership was women. It was a completely female hierarchy. It was a completely female institution in every way. It was completely different than a normal company. The way it worked, you just put it exactly right. The point of everything was political. And the final product of the company was the company. Like it was everything everybody did was to make the company a nicer place to be, which you can't necessarily blame women for that instinct, right? It's like, okay, their instinct is to make the house a nicer place to be, or whatever, make wherever a nicer place to be. But when they all get together, it tips, you reach a tipping point, and it tips into a straight up longhouse. It tips into a different thing entirely. Like the amount of work the women who worked at this company did a day was like almost zero. Oh, they just had meetings all day, every day, and no one cared. Like there was no maintenance, there was no monitoring, there was no like, hey, you spent 7.5 hours on the phone today and 10 minutes doing work. Like, isn't that bad? There was just no accountability at all. And I just think that like when we're talking about the brick wall and the whatever's going on, the one, or at least one of the very interesting things about this power structure is when it reaches a certain critical mass of women, it's going to tip into a different thing entirely, and it's going to die immediately. It's just going to like collapse because it's going to stop production. Like production will not occur.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the technocrats think that AI is going to fill the gaps here. Yeah. That's their plan. I don't think that will ultimately work, especially when it comes to things like, political conflict, which will eventually erupt in this sphere. And when that happens, all bets are off. But it doesn't seem like these companies are stable. it doesn't seem like their business models are stable or that they really do anything of note.
Oh, they don't do anything.
And so, yeah, I mean, this is going to be something that,
But they're
it
going
seems like
to
it just has to collapse.
no,
What?
they're going to creep into the actual elements of production, and then once that starts happening, then the whole thing it's just going to like collapse instantly. It's not even going to be like there will be no slow decline. It'll once it trips the wire, it will or trips once it gets to a certain number of women in the thing, it just will not work anymore. Anyway, all right, let's just change gears here really quick. So I want to talk about art.
Sure.
You had a great intro to your thing where you talked a lot about Guillermo del Toro, who neither of us can say.
Yeah.
But Guillermo del Toro.
Guillermo del Toro.
Yeah, and I completely agree with what you were saying. You were saying he has these hollowed out versions of movies we know, The Shape of Water, Pan's Labyrinth, that are just vague shit-lib allegories with no meaning besides that there's just like this central racist and everybody has to like band together against this central racist. But they're beautiful. They have amazing production design, amazing visual effects.
I'm trying to the thing is it's not like he took this from the Scandinavian artists. I'm forgetting which one it was. This is it. This is John Bauer. That's the artist I constantly associate with the artistic direction of Guillermo del Toro. There are these beautiful woodcuts of like trolls and goblins. Yeah. And John Bauer, if you want to Google him, he is this 1915 artist, and that's very much where the Guillermo del Toro look comes from, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like how Ridley Scott took everything from H.R. Geiger.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, like, I do want to kind of compliment him on his creature features. The look of his elves, the look of his demon from Pan's Labyrinth was an amazing horror trope, taken straight from classic children's fables. The chaotic demons that live in the underworld. But the thing is that this is not well integrated into a world. It's just kind of there, right? And what is the original demons that he's based. The White Devil is a perfect example, right? Like the lesson of the demon as it would exist archetypically is that the indulgence of the pleasure allows you to become the feast of the demon, right? So like you eat the feast, the demon eats you, right? And to go back to his most recent venture in Pinocchio, right? Everyone will remember this from the Disney version, although I think it was slightly less prominent in the original fairy tale. The fairy tale is a lot different from the Disney one, but this is actually very much in keeping with the beliefs of the I'm forgetting the guy's name who did the original Pinocchio. He was an Italian nationalist from the 19th century, and he doesn't really, like most Italian nationalists, he doesn't really map on to the political order of our own day, which is thoroughly Anglo. But it's a mixture of some beliefs we would consider very right wing and some beliefs we would consider very left, or not very left wing, but left wing for his time. Right. And his idea was like young men go off and they become jackasses by indulging their pleasures. And then Disney really steps into this in their version, right? Where there's just these horrific transformations of young children into donkeys and are crying for their mothers and all this stuff. And the message is very much the same as the demonic figure in Del Toro's Pan's Labyrinth. If you submit yourself, if you become a slave to pleasures, the pleasures will end up consuming you. And this is true in our real life. But does Del Toro believe that? Like this, Del Toro does not believe that the indulgence of pleasure leads you to become a monster, because the message of all of his movies is that like some people just need to learn to indulge their pleasure more. Like there's a horrific scene where in like there's sort of a body horror scene in The Shape of Water where the heroine sleeps with a fish creature.
Yeah,
like this is a fish creature that like is borderline not sentient, right? I mean, maybe he's sentient in his own way, but like this thing does not understand that you don't eat a cat, right? Like, don't eat the cat is something that we're having a hard time communicating to this being.
But you can bang him.
We can bang it,
Yeah,
right?
you can still bang.
We can bang it because, like, this class of creatures, like this class of people, because they are this progressive protected group, like all of their indulgence and pleasure is like valid.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And so, like, what would ordinarily be a moment of pure horror, like a pure element of disrespect to this creature, which should be treated as an independent entity on its own terms, is it's being superimposed into this romantic fantasy of this woman. There should be a moment of horror, but we're expected to applaud it. Mm-hmm. And so you have these, like the Pinocchio thing and the Pan's Labyrinth. You have like these classic tropes of fairy tales. They're being introduced into this framework that just does not fit them at all.
Yeah, right. They're being kind of repurposed into this thing that doesn't make any sense, and that's why those movies are so hollow and empty. And not very successful. Yeah,
and they're successful in the fact that they appeal to an audience, but like nothing feels like you've really been like, oh my God, I have to process this. I think that if a hard fairy tale just kind of held a lens to the face of modern man, we would kind of react in horror to that, which I think so much of horror kind of does this implicitly, but unfortunately millennials are people that need to have things spelled out for them, and unfortunately the only people that can suffer in progressive fairy tales are these stereotypes of 1950s dads, right?
Is the white guy, the right conservative guy. So would you say, you have a great quote that popular politics is the destruction of the creative will. I don't know if that's that seems related to what we're saying, because we're talking about creativity, we're talking about art, we're talking about the act of creation. Is Del Toro essentially a political actor? And is that what you mean? Do you mean that his creative will has been destroyed by the fact that he is a political actor?
No, I don't think he's a political actor. I think he's just kind of repeating back what the elites kind of want to hear, which is that like there were evil men, but they were all white and straight and fascist, and they lived a long time ago. And once you're flipping them the bird, you can basically do no wrong, right?
So, but is that propaganda that he's making? Or it sounds like you're saying that a film like that is not propaganda. A film like that is just bad. And it's bad because he is trying to set up a bad guy in a way that just is empty and ineffective.
Yeah, I mean, this is the ironic thing about this process, is that I guess when I think about propaganda, I think about things that are sort of compelling, that invite you to believe the thing, that like a new thing that you didn't believe before. But the stuff that's coming out of Hollywood is kind of, it feels like emotionally copy. There's a channel called Blackpilled, which is, he does these movie reviews for old movies, and he revisits things like Forrest Gump and Norma Ray, which would be two great examples. Now, these are movies that, for our parent generation, like they were deeply moved by these movies, like Forrest Gump and Norma Ray. These are classically propaganda. Like you look at them with a discerning eye, and you see that they've inserted all of these sort of leftist messages about like who the good people are and who the bad people are. A classic example is in Norma Ray. It's this Jewish intellectual that comes into sort of this very explicitly poor Gentile working class community. And the movie treats like these poor workers with just like the utmost contempt for their culture. They're just seen as like completely ignoramuses that live these unauthentic existences. It's like a Borat treatment, basically. Like he portrays those workers like, the guy who does Borat portrays people from Kazakhstan, like these ignorant people, like these peasants.
Yeah.
And like people ate this stuff up, like they actually took to it.
Yeah. Wow.
The thing, and the Forrest Gump would be an example too. I'm like, Forrest Gump, he goes through the 60s. And he gives you sort of the most whitewashed, boomer-friendly version of the 60s, where like the lesson of the 60s was like, it was all great, except some people took it a little bit too far. But in the end, like, it all sorted out because, like, we're a breeze in the wind, and progress itself is going to kind of blow us in the right direction. We're going to kind of stumble backwards on wholesomeness just because that's the movement of history. We're like the leaf in the wind. These are sort of like, these would be like effective propaganda. They actually capture the imaginations. Whereas no one who watches Del Toro's Shape of Water, I mean, nobody who's like, we all understand that this is sort of progressives giving us their worldview, and the people who like it are already on board, and they're kind of coping with the fact that this worldview doesn't make sense anymore.
Well, right.
So I guess it's propaganda, but it's sort of like, convincing yourself that you made the right decision, right?
But propaganda isn't, I mean, propaganda just comes from the word propagate, which is a church thing. I mean, it started with the church, with, I think, the Catholic Church, I want to say.
Like indoctrinate, right?
Yeah, it just means to propagate your message.
Yeah.
So I don't think you can necessarily define propaganda by how good it is, right? I guess what I'm trying to say is like, where is the line between propaganda and art today? Like this, so there's this whole category of movies. Somebody made a great meme of it the other day that's like civil rights revisionist fantasy. And it's like there's a whole bunch of these movies. It's like Hidden Figures. Did you hear about Hidden Figures?
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, well, I actually haven't seen it, but I saw all the trailers. There's so many movies like that, right?
It's telling us that like black women are the reason we went to the moon, right? Or they'll be like Selma. All these movies, they tell, it's canonization of the black people from this past, and they all have the same kind of cover. And it's all the same thing that you're saying, like some, group of Jews comes down and helps out to, like help out the black person to fight against the evil torch wielding, like conservative guys. And that's every single one of these movies is the same thing. Are those even movies? Or is that just, I mean, are we basically, that is like, as you're saying, Red Guard propaganda? Like, that's not even really a movie, is it?
Yeah, so man, in order for art to be good art, the artist has to kind of reveal some issue that they're struggling with. I'm not saying that art can't be hopeful. Like, for instance, if I had a piece of art that was like, we have this deep problem, I don't know how to solve it, but in this sort of idealized version of art, like, they win. A classic example would be like Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, which is sort of like implicitly like the struggle going on in Lord of the Rings at all times is sort of an age of myth and fantasy slowly being abolished, and people fighting back against it. And in the end, the age of myth is abolished, but not in the most horrific way it could have been, right? It could have been completely abolished, and now sort of like a thread of the magic kind of carries on, but really only implicitly, right? And that's sort of like the reason why this resonates with people is that Tolkien is struggling with a sense of loss and a sense of mournfulness. And when Tolkien sees the armies of Mordor emerging and marching forward and kind of seeding what was once like a wholesome land with destruction, he is reacting to a crisis that I think was very viscerally felt when he saw the ravages of World War One.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think that the message is hopeful, but like he's struggling with something. The artists of most modern movies aren't struggling with something. They're not. I'm sure they're afraid of something in the future. I'm sure that they have some path that they want to, take to sort of like rectify what they know is actually going to be true, but they're too sort of, they're in love with their own self-insert images too much to really kind of take stock of that. I only watched a few episodes of this show, but a classic example was in like Girls, like Lena Dunham's show. Like the purposeful, like the artistic dimension of that show is like modern millennial women lead squalid lives. and the only way that catharsis can be communicated is if like you come to some conclusion by which they realize that living squalid lives and stop living squalid lives. But that's the problem is that Lena Dunham is too invested in her own life to ever make that an explicit point.
That's what's so
catharsis.
It can't end. That's
yeah. So it's like this contradiction has to be maintained.
They can't learn any lessons. They can't learn any lessons. That's the thing, because it has
they can't.
And this is such a female thing. You look at, like, also another sector of propaganda.
Jane Austen pulled this off very effectively.
I don't know about Jane Austen.
No, I mean, like, you know, you look at a character, like, how could you look at a character like Fanny Price? Okay. Jane Austen did not write.
Who's Fanny Price? Right? I've never read any Jane Austen. Nor what.
Okay, so Fanny Price is the heroine of Mansfield Park, right? Okay. And maybe she's. I mean, you know, these characters like Elizabeth from Pride and Prejudice, like, they kind of overcome their own narcissism. And admittedly, this is a very early 19th century form of female narcissism. But Jane Austen very much believes that this instinct inside her for pride has to be suppressed, right? So that the greater virtue can spring forward. Modern female artists have no cons. I mean, some of them do, obviously, but like the ideology prevents them from expressing this, right?
Yeah. I think, did you see Promising Young Woman?
No, I haven't.
Perfect propaganda film is we're exactly talking about right now. So it's about a female, basically serial killer who kills men who wrong women. Right. So
there you go. Right.
In every male version of this, so like American Psycho, any male serial killer movie, right? The male serial killer, there's some little element of humanity to them that we literally me, right? I just had that Kino Corner guy on my podcast. You know, that we think, oh, we're just like that guy, but they get completely destroyed. They do things that are terrible. And we learn at the end of the day that this is like not the path that we're supposed to go on, right? They learn some kind of lesson. This movie is so insane because she's a female serial killer, but she doesn't actually do anything wrong. Like, she's super hot, first of all. So she's not like fat or anything. Yeah. You can't be that. We're all super hot. And the way she interacts with men is like, she doesn't actually kill them. She just like makes them think she's going to kill them. And then they're really scared and embarrassed. And like, by the end of it, there's no,
and they all deserve it, probably.
Yeah, they all deserve it. And by the end of it, it's like she does that for an hour and a half, and then the movie ends. Like, there's no arc. Like, you know, it's just like, here is the perspective of a
you go, girl. Yeah, just like, what conflict is the artist feeling like in there? So like the fact that they're not appreciated enough, the fact that they like to do this is like an indulgent fantasy. Yes. This is like
no, the arc like, is the world. The arc is outside of the theater. The arc is like what she's doing to the bad men who are watching, you know, and that's what makes it like such a propaganda, which is so funny. All right, let's finish up on this one question that we can't leave without me asking you, because it's just such a great framework. So you've said that you raised this question of what is a victory for us, for our side, and what is not a victory. And you use this framework that Curtis Yarvin has laid out for us, which is a victory is only a victory. So a victory would be, for example, Roe being overturned. That's only a victory for our side, right-wing people, whatever we are, if it makes further victories easier.
Yes.
So, I mean, that feels like a very bad definition of a victory. I mean, no offense. Like, does that make sense? Because aren't there? I mean, think about
why would you say? Because you know, if a victory makes future victories harder, then your victory is already abolishing itself at the moment of its realization.
Well, it's like any movie, right? Think about Braveheart. Like in the beginning. The victories that they win in the beginning make it much harder because they've struck a first blow, and now all the energy of the thing is going to be pointed against you, right? Like, right? Like a first victory, inevitably the next victory is going to be harder than if you hadn't won the first victory, because now the enemy is paying attention to you.
Fair enough, but I mean, presumably you're building an army that's making your side stronger, right?
Right.
So I mean, like, you know, unless that victory caused people, you know, I would consider your first victory to be making yourself stronger, because the King of England always had an army and you never did. So by winning the first victory, you were obtaining one army. You know, maybe you'll have to fight a bigger army, but your army is bigger.
Yeah. Okay.
The problem with the conservative movement's victories is that every time they win a victory, their army gets smaller. So that is and I don't think Roe was a defeat. I don't think Roe really changed much. The Roe overturning really changed much at all. And to be honest, it was a necessary transformation that the pro-life movement had to do. Like they had to kind of get over this sort of like horse racing around the Supreme Court justice and start talking about how we build on the ground infrastructure to encourage people to form families and to not get abortions. So in some sense, this was them kind of getting their head in the real game, and this is a necessary step. But I don't think it made them significantly larger. It didn't force Blue America to accept conditions of surrender. Like who in Blue America, what pro-life? So when, for instance, when Obergefell v. Hodges happened, and that was the right one, right? When gay marriage was legalized in 2015, a number of prominent conservatives like just bent the knee to gay marriage and said, this is a fait accompli. This is the new normal. We have to get used to it. This is the way things are. How many pro-choicers, when Roe was overturned, went, well, abortion can be illegal. That's just the way things are now. Did anyone do that?
Who was convinced? Who was actually brought over?
Convinced or just convinced to bend a knee? Convinced to bow out?
That's a great point. Yeah. No,
nobody was, right? And actually, like Twitter was a better example. Like when the left cries, it's like a crocodile. It cries when it's about to eat you. So the fact that they're really upset is not an indication that they've lost. Usually I found more often than not, when the leftists lose and they really lose, they start getting really quiet. They start shutting up, right? Because
so most people one of those in the modern left, like
Twitter,
give me
Twitter. They all shut, like they complained about Elon Musk and they still do. But you notice that when they lost Twitter, start getting a lot more quiet on a lot of things.
Yeah, that's
the volume on, especially the stuff about the vax stuff. They really started shutting because they realized that like their control over the narrative was weakened, and they might not be on the winning side.
That is really true. After Twitter, the vax stuff like flipped almost.
Yeah,
I think that's really that's a great point for sure.
They started making concessions. He started having articles like, oh, wow, maybe we just need to kind of let bygones be bygones, because they're worried that they might lose control over the narrative. And I don't think that actually came to pass. But you'll notice this kind of thing, like when the left is made up of opportunists for the most part at this stage. So if they feel like they might suffer for their opinions in a meaningful way in the future, then they're going to like just not express those opinions.
Yeah, but aren't things like the Roe thing? I still disagree with Curtis on the Roe thing, because aren't certain things? You've talked a lot about the ideal method for our side is blue state eyes and red state heart.
Yeah.
And by that I'm interpreting you to mean we need to have a brain that thinks Machiavellian, and we need to have a heart that thinks passion, emotion, doing the right thing. And
no, that's less poisoned by modern ethics.
Yeah, right. Religion. That's less poisoned by the muck of what we have to deal with, right?
And there are a lot of people in red states that are thoroughly paused, and there's a lot of people in blue states that are thoroughly illusioned. But just taking the best from both worlds, that's really where they're bringing up the front, is that the blue states tend to have the people who can kind of see things a bit better, clearer, I should say, and the red states have the ones that have the elements of their souls that are less touched by this modern gibberish, for the most part, on average, right?
Yeah. No, I think that's really fair, but something like Roe. Isn't there, there's some philosophical term for this. Isn't there some isn't that an a priori victory? I know that we're going to talk about the numbers of dead babies, how many babies are actually dead because of it. It's
the victory is to make abortion something that is not done, not to move the laws around. Like if you could eliminate all abortions without making the law, I'd do that, right?
Well, no, but as you said, I think the true victory would be living in a society that doesn't make sex into a friggin',
Yeah,
That's
that's
the thing you do on every day a million times. It's a
yeah,
disgusting,
not having to define yourself by sex. I mean,
right.
the problem is like this is a broader sexual culture,
Yeah.
and targeting it on abortion is kind of putting the car like what are we going to do? Are we going to have like promiscuous sex and then just kind of leave women with the bill, right? For this all like raising single children because abortion's illegalized, but nothing else about our culture has changed. Like obviously not. That's ridiculous.
Well, but that could be. But how else would we
It's
do?
unsustainable.
But like,
What?
how would we win? So walk me through how we would actually win that victory. Then.
Well, I don't think that this victory can be won without sort of a complete destruction of the cathedral. This is what, I hate to constantly be copying from Yarvin, but he
No,
does create my famous expressions. So his idea of a regime complete problem. The problem is that currently our modern sexual culture is considered high status. When modern sexual culture is considered low status, that will change. So if a woman says like, "Oh, I'm unmarried and have had 34 sexual partners in my life," and then people are like, "Oh my god, this is trailer trash. What am I doing?" And I don't care if you've got a degree from Brown or something like that. I don't care if you used to be the HR manager for some Silicon Valley company. You're just, this is disgusting. What do you know? How are they even hiring such a low class person?
Yeah.
Once that becomes the emotion, this will change very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Nothing is like, millennials do not have very much sex. This is not a very high libido generation. We're not being compelled into these sexual lifestyles because people just can't control their deeply erotic passions. I mean, this is not a very erotic age at
No,
all.
it's sexy.
Nothing is sexy. It's
Sexless.
sexless,
It's
right?
sexy with
Like
sex.
people are literally going out and having sexual encounters because they want to cultivate a queer identity.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, they are, right? Like they don't like it. They're not drawn to it because they're drawn to the body or the excitement or the romance.
Yeah.
We're reaching what Poglia called like the completely desexualization of sex.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Totally.
And this
Yeah.
is, Camille Poglia is very famous for this concept. And it's absolutely manifested in the millennial generation, was keeping this sort of LGBTQ promiscuous stuff going is because of the high status of sort of this degenerate behavior. It's being used as a totem to show that you stand close to power. Because if you're middle class and these sexual behaviors aren't destroying your life like they would for people in the underclass, then you must by definition be high status.
Yeah. It's funny at Burning Man, they always say it's the sexiest and most sexless place on earth. Like you go to
Yeah.
Burning Man and it's literally like a group of 10,000 people worshiping a girl's like ass as the sun is rising and she's like on, like naked priestess with like a thong on. And you'd think like, oh, it would be ravenous fucking. You see no one having actual sex. Like nobody actually has sex at Burning Man. It's just like
it's all the spectacle, right?
Yeah, without actual real sex.
Yeah, I mean, it's all obviously there's no fertility in any of this either. Like it's a sterile generation as well.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is just something that so we can create sub communities that idolize that sort of idolize the cults, that idolize the family, and that worship God and that value married women above sort of these kind of characters that emerge from this gender ideology. But for the time being, until this becomes macrocosmically low status, the idea of overthrowing the sexual revolution at a macro scale is going to be pie in the sky, really. But you can see it kind of it could flip fast, right? If the American government were to become deeply humiliated and there was a revolution and the ruling class has changed, there's a circulation of elites, I guarantee it, all these women who have advertising their sexual partners on TikTok, they'll delete all the videos and they'll transform into they'll be Whole Food trad wives, right? The next day, right? And it will be a big secret, and it will be this could flip in a moment if power flips.
Yeah.
Well, they'll be covering up all their tattoos, and people did this, and the boomers did this, right?
Yeah.
Gen X did this to a certain extent as well. but you know, the reason is I think the millennials think that the current power structure is eternal, and it's not.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool, man. Well, we
Okay.
got to stop because I left my charger at the office and
Okay.
my computer's going to die. But
All right. Well, thanks so much for having me on. Yeah.
dude, thank you so much. I mean, I'm sure everybody actually, where is the most core touch point for you? Because I know you have YouTube, and then how do people find you? Like, do you even
So yeah, probably everything's going to be on YouTube. I also have a Substack at Fiddler's Green at substack.com. And yeah, I'm trying to kind of reorganize my content. Right now, my community is kind of pushing IRL meetups, but we're not really at that stage where we're going out with a website yet. But my YouTube channel, my Substack are the two main ones. So yeah, thank you for having me on. Yeah.
So you're doing a lot of IRL meetups?
We had a conference last year, and we are and then we are doing another one this year, a little bit later in the year. And then we're doing kind of like micro meetups just for people to kind of hang out. And this is a project being done in coordination with a bunch of other YouTubers.
What is it called? Like how do
basket weaving. That was you may have heard of it in other contexts. I think Ed Dutton promoted it. A few other people have promoted it as well. And this is a project that's becoming more because deatomization is a core driver of our problems. The left wins atomized humanity. The right wins humanity and community, because humanity and community needs order. The right wing is the force of order and independence.
In our rooms, clicking branded content, cutting ourselves, and masturbating all day. That's what they want.
Wait, but being sick independent.
How do I find the conference? What is the conference?
The conference is called the Sildings Conference, and it's mainly in England, but there was an American version that it was in it was in Tennessee, and you can find my talk to it there on my YouTube channel. It's one of my posted videos. Prudentialist has one too. There's you can buy the conference proceedings, and there'll be another one that occurs.
I want to go. I really want to start this.
Yeah.
I can't find it. Cool. Google Sildings concept. Nothing.
I'll forward it to you.
Forward it.
Anyway, thanks for having me on. It was great.
Thanks so much, man. I'm gonna stop recording.